Good morning, everyone. So it's our honor to invite Dr. Genevieve Leung from University of San Francisco and also Dr. Ming-Shuan from Delphi University. I hope my pronunciation is right.
It's good.
So let's welcome them.
I'll applause for my, give myself some.
I'll do it. I will do a sound effect.
Okay, thanks everyone for being here and waking up early in the morning to be here and being in the space together. So Ming and I are going to co-lead this presentation. Ming will be sort of the slide deck controller, and then we'll switch off round sort of hand the baton to each other and do this presentation. The last time we did this presentation, we were in Taiwan together. So Ming, I miss you. Next time we should have a reunion in Taiwan. Okay, so I'm going to go over the agenda really quick. My name is Genevieve. We'll do a little bit of introductions in the next slide. But I just wanted to start us off with our agenda, which includes a warm-up poll so we can get to know each other a little bit. I don't think we know any of you, so this warm-up will help us get to know each other a little bit more. We'll talk about linguistic imperialism. I think this term is really big, and so we'll kind of unpack that and talk about how this relates to language, teaching, and also diversity, and you as teachers of English, right? And our roles as teachers of English. We'll talk a little bit about the kind of the tensions among kind of this idea of cultural ambassadorship, this cultural fluidity, and our own intersectionalities and why it matters. And then we'll give you all some time to debrief in small groups, right? So that's sort of our agenda. You can see on the top right in yellow, a breakdown of today's talk. We'll go for about 50 minutes, 50, and then break, and then go for another 50 minutes. Of those second half of the 50 minutes, we'll break you off into groups. And then the remaining kind of time, if you have any lingering questions, or even during our talk, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll be happy to discuss with you. I know we are a large group, so yeah, feel free to maintain an active chat life, and we'll go from there. Okay, I guess I will introduce myself and then hand it off to Dr. Wu. As Kevin mentioned in his very generous introduction, I am an associate professor at the University of San Francisco, and at USF I teach rhetoric and language, but I also direct a program called Critical Diversity Studies and the Asian American Studies at USF. I grew up in San Francisco. Cantonese is my first language, and I was a former ESL student. Ming? Oh.
Good evening, everybody. I'm right now actually in New York, so it's my night time. So I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk to all of you. So I grew up in Taiwan. I learned English as a school subject. So I know all the grammar, approach, the drills, things that I've been through. English has been my favorite subject, but to be very honest, I didn't know what Asian really means until I studied in the US as a grad student. I didn't know that my accented English could incur different stereotypical images of me as an Asian woman in the US. So right now, my work predominantly is about training pre-service and in-service teachers in New York's metropolitan area. So I work with the immigrant families a lot. A lot of the time I have to help them navigate the school systems. And today I hope that I can bring in my insider perspective to help you sort of get adjusted to your life in Taiwan, I would say more easily, because a lot of times the way we Taiwanese learn English is very different from the ESL students that you might have encountered in the US. There are some very distinctive similarities or differences that I think we can talk about.
Great, thanks. And I'll just also add that Ming and I, we go back far, long ways back. We went to graduate school together, and during that time, we also did a lot of pre-service training presentations together. We're friends. I think we're friends, right? And so we were really excited to be able to co-present and be in the space with you today. So as I mentioned earlier, we have some questions for you. I'm going to drop this in the chat. It's a poll everywhere set of polls. So if you could just hop on the Poll Everywhere site, everybody can participate. And it's anonymous. Nobody knows whose responses are what. Okay, so the first question I think I've already activated. So it includes the question, right? Can you all see this okay? Right? Where are you from? So we have 9 questions. This is our first. If you could just drop a pin. Ooh, okay. Like, where are you from? It's nice to see where y'all are from. Ooh.
Oh, wow. So
Basically everywhere.
Right.
In the US.
That's wonderful. So I think that also shows that how diverse this group is. When we think of diversity, we want to move beyond just the stereotypical conversation about race, cultures. Sometimes the location, right, where you have lived the most of your life also matters, and they're gonna shape the way you view your experience in Taiwan as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you all for sharing. So this is sort of how we'll go through the 9 questions. You'll answer, we'll kind of have more banter and talk. Okay, this is great. Look at all those pins being dropped. All right. Shall I move on to the next?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So let me activate. All right. So the next question is a yes or no question. I have taught English before in any capacity, right? So if it's like you're tutoring, big brothers, big sisters kind of capacity, or you have actual teaching experience, you have a teaching license. Yeah, fantastic.
Wow. So many of you have taught English before, which is great because that means you have the experience of taking up a more experienced expert type of role. But for those of you who haven't, please don't be panic because a lot of times a good teacher is someone who is open-minded. Yeah. And who is very willing to learn about your students' life and voices.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Now this is a good number of folks who have had experiences teaching. So thanks. It's good to know the playing field we're working with. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to activate the next question. Agree, disagree. My first language is English. Okay. So we've got a few disagrees. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think Ming, you and I would answer disagree.
Disagree, right?
Yeah.
And I would kind of want to make a note here. So as we move along, you will notice that having a very powerful language as your first language is a privilege. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit because I, growing up in Taiwan, who have spent so much time and money, effort learning English, there was a moment when I wish that English was my first language, so I don't need to spend that much time, money, effort learning that. But of course, now at my age, I already come to a full turn that I love, my roots. I love my heritage. But just so you know that for those of you who speak English as a first language, you do have a lot of like a privilege that associate with that.
Yeah, like cachet, right? Mm-hmm. Linguistic capital, I guess the research likes to use this term. All right, so that was our third question. We'll move on to the fourth question, and let me activate this. Okay, so now this gets at the, what other languages do you speak? So in addition to English, I can also speak blank. So you can put it in a row. I list all the languages you can speak. And so your answers will pop up on the slide. We got Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, ooh, Hebrew, Arabic, awesome. We've got a few Japanese. Mm-hmm. Anybody speak Cantonese? Oh. I'm curious to see if it pops up. Vietnamese, French, ooh, wow. Okay, Spanish, I feel like we're narrating the Olympics right now. We're like, okay, Spanish, German, Mandarin, yeah.
Oh, German.
Mandarin, Spanish would be more Spanish. Mandarin, fantastic. Okay, Spanish and Chinese.
Excellent.
Yeah.
A lot of times, as a multilingual, the way your brain function is actually very different from monolinguals. So thumbs up for those of you have become bilingual or multilinguals, and your experience of becoming a bilingual or multilingual gonna help you as you teach English to speakers of other languages. And for those of you who regarded yourself as English monolingual, I actually would encourage you to take this opportunity while you're in Taiwan to learn some local languages. It could be Mandarin, it could be some other local languages, because it's gonna really change the way you view yourself and then the way you use language.
Yeah, and I saw Tagalog, I
Oh,
saw
Tagalog.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's also really, Bengali.
Bengali, yay.
Yeah, I think even thinking about language and power, right? When I grew up, as I mentioned, I speak Cantonese. And so when I grew up, the Chinese and I said I spoke Chinese, Chinese actually referred to Cantonese. And so it wasn't until I went to school where I met Mandarin speakers and I was like, I speak Chinese. And they were like, no, you don't. And so I realized that sometimes people refer to Mandarin Chinese as Chinese, right? Oh, wow. Urdu, Hindi, Arabic, that's a lot of languages. Fantastic.
Yeah, this is
great. So just even thinking about the role that terminology and words play in even something as supposedly innocuous as the name of a language, right? It makes a difference. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so we've got a lot of learners of Mandarin, speakers of Mandarin. Fantastic. Cool. Thank you for those of you all who have been populating our responses. I think poll everywhere is a little slow. It's just like slowly streaming. Okay, so we'll have all the answers kept and saved. So we'll move on to the fifth set of questions, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yes or no? I have been to Asia before. Some of you are probably in Asia right now. So not counting this time in Taiwan.
No, right.
I have been to Asia before this current trip. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Okay, cool.
Yo, I was a little bit surprised to see that so many of you have been to Asia. This is great.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I feel, because right now I'm raising two Taiwanese Americans, I oftentimes feel the culture in Asia versus the USA culture, there are some drastic differences that a lot of times even I myself need to adjust and grapple with. So if you, for the next few months, you feel like you are experiencing cultural shocks, I just want to tell you that you are not alone. And you should feel some cultural shock. So even for me, who travel back and forth, but then who spend most of my time in the US, every time I come back from Taiwan and then restart my life in the US, I feel like I have a cultural shock. So a lot of times that means you need to find your support group. Okay. And a lot of times, whether or not you can adjust yourself well, is not just as a matter of time, but it's also about getting to know who the people you are interact with, why they have that kind of, say, mindset, where are they coming from. Those type of information gonna help you very well. So hopefully for some workshops or your own reading, you will get to know Taiwan a little bit better. And in our workshop, Jen and I will try to kind of bring in our local knowledge as much as we can to help you.
Great. Thanks, Ming. All right. Our sixth question. We're almost there. We saw really interesting responses, right? So our question for you is, how much would you say you currently know about Taiwan? So it's a drinking glass full of water. just water. And so that's representing sort of the knowledge you perceive you have about Taiwan. Yeah. Great. Okay, thanks.
Sure. That's okay, good.
Yeah.
Even like for me, I feel like I'm still learning about Taiwan. Yeah, because growing up in Taiwan, in my generation, we spend so much time studying history about China, not so much about Taiwan. So I always joke that I'm learning about the history of Taiwan with my kids, right? So again, I'll be happy to share, but at the same time, there are various venues that you can try to get to know Taiwan history, the language, the economy, so on and so forth.
And some of which I think Fulbright is also putting on for you all, right? I think similar to Ming, as a university student born in the US, studying Mandarin, coverage of Taiwan was like non-existent. So it wasn't until I came to Taiwan the first time as actually a TEFL advisor for Fulbright that I was like, oh my gosh, there's like a whole nother world out there. And so this time around, I'm in Taiwan under a Taiwan fellowship grant. And that's also adding sort of to my knowledge of Taiwan that I think came a little too late, right? So I was like, I'm glad that you all are able to get this sort of experience early on rather than sort of later on, like for me. All right, thanks. So that is very helpful information to know. Our seventh question for you here is about kind of your own well-being and the pandemic, right? We know a lot of folks have experienced a lot with this global pandemic, and obviously it will also affect your students, the students that you will end up working with, your colleagues, right? So we wanted to just see, how has the global pandemic influenced you socially, emotionally?
Yeah. I would say this has been a very tough year for many people, even though Taiwan, from foreigners' perspective, seems to handle the pandemic very well. A lot of my local friends in Taiwan, they still feel very anxious about this pandemic because we don't have enough vaccines. So people has been so scared that there will be outbreaks. So the attitude that you will see from your student or teacher about this pandemic might be very different from what you see from the States. Yeah, you might be you might see someone policing, okay, whether or not you wear a mask. And if you don't wear a mask, they basically, someone will want to call on the police and then give you a fine. So you see that societal attitude to handle the pandemic is very, very different. And back in May, when there were a few outbreaks in Taiwan, you see that people were not just panic, they basically just didn't know how to handle their I would say social and emotional well-being. And you will see a lot of kids, also parents, they become super anxious about what might come next. Just so you know, a lot of parents in Taiwan, they are not really allowed to work from home. So it's not like in the US, most of the company have make it a norm that you can work from home. In Taiwan, many of the companies don't want you to work from home. So how that would impact how parents view online learning or how teachers view online learning is still very different from the way the USA handle it. So I want you to keep that in mind, but at the same time, I think that I want you to really prioritize your own social emotional well-being. Yeah, because you're gonna be away from home. You might feel lonely, and then you might not quite agree the way Taiwanese people handle the pandemic, right? So again, the social support group is crucial. And yes, I just kind of want to highlight that just as you have experienced a very tough year in the US, the local Taiwanese people are also experiencing that. even though from, again, the outsider's perspective, it's like nothing. You guys have like a very few confirmed cases. But no, the Taiwanese people view these like a double-digit confirmed cases as pretty much like at the end of the world.
Wow, that's very extreme. But yes, I know what you're saying. Cool. Great. So we have two more questions and I'm just gonna push along. Here we go. These are all open-ended questions, so feel free to type it in and they'll just show up. What is most exciting to you about being an ETA? So this is now your turn to kind of give us some elaborate responses. Bonding with meeting the students. Yeah. Learning about Taiwan. Learning through teaching. Yeah. Learning, meeting my students, connecting with LATs, meeting students, relationships. Oh, this is fast. I guess this is what happens when we have a lot of people, right? Connecting, let's see, learning about Taiwan, teaching, cultural immersion, students, lots of students, shape students' futures, learning about Taiwan, learning about life in Taiwan. Yeah. I'm going to scroll really quick. Intimate understanding of Taiwan, culture, religion, language, politics, more practice teaching, democracy.
Oh,
exploring
nice.
Taiwan.
Love that. Very nice. Very nice.
Community engagement. Sorry, this is cultural exchange, networking, international education and its role in diplomacy. Yeah.
Wow. I feel so excited.
It's good to know, right? So I'm gonna not give you all a shock by scrolling too quickly, right? But yeah, I think collectively we're getting a sense of building community, learning, practical tips and tricks about teaching, working with students, and learning about Taiwan as sort of the overarching themes, which is wonderful and great, right? And very much aligned with, I think, the mission of the ETA program. Fantastic. Ming, do you have anything to add before I sort of jump into the next? Okay, so I'll have one last question and poll for you, and that is challenges, right? So we talked about what makes you excited about being ETA. Feel free to type in any potential challenges. This is an upvote as well. So if you type something and somebody else thinks like, oh, I also agree, feel free, you can upvote it. Right. So, okay. So language barrier. Okay. Language shows up. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Miscommunication. Yeah. Being away from loved ones. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah. Language. Right. So kind of the top few. Culture, language, pandemic. Yeah. Okay. Demographic, right? The age of students, for example. Right.
Right.
This is true. Y'all are adults. They're children. Or even you might have supervisors who are not the same age as you. Mental health, language, or maybe remote learning. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Remote learning.
Right.
Yeah. Being so different in appearance, homesickness. Being a new teacher. Yeah, classroom management. Yeah.
Yes, all these are very legit, right? A lot of times, it's not just about language, right? It's also about culture, how people view a social act very differently. And then the language barrier sometimes it just maybe make it worse. So can totally feel you're like anxious, but again, be open-minded and then be informed of this local social norm. I think it would be very helpful. Sometimes I found that a lot of times when you feel embarrassed or when you take something kind of personally, you might feel like you have no other person in the group to really understand you. But guess what? You have the second year ETAs that you might be able to turn to. You definitely will find someone in your local community who more or less would like to sit down with you and listen to you and try to offer you some sort of advice. So whenever you feel like you couldn't handle the challenges, please, please, please do make sure to reach out and then to talk to someone. And I think Fulbright is there to help you with that too.
Yeah. So at this moment, I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can pick up the next slide. Absolutely. Great. So thank you, folks, for entertaining our survey. It's always good to be able to get to know you all and get these responses from you, right? So kind of to sum up, we sort of just wanted, like, why do we do this 20-minute exercise, right? I think really is to help us critically think through, right? What are our roles as English teachers, right? So are we cultural ambassadors? And if that is the case, what does that exactly entail, right? For those of us who have various intersections of first languages, where we grew up, where we are, gender identities, et cetera, right? And what does this mean for a larger picture of, like, what does global citizenry mean? And how does that look like in the face of, diversity, right? It's not just one boilerplate cookie cutter response, right? And if you think about it sort of from a philosophical view, right? If we are here engaging as teachers, what does English education mean when it comes to this idea of emancipatory learning, right? If learning is supposed to be an emancipatory process that builds up knowledge and is freeing, right? How do we move beyond doing English education just for the sake of passing exams, which might be something that you will encounter in your teaching as ETAs, right? So we'll kind of grapple and engage with these questions broadly, right? Given the answers that you provided for us. Right, so I think this next one is also me. I think we'll set up the playing field of how is English seen globally, right? And I think for those of us who grew up in the US, maybe we're like, yeah, English, it's English. But I think lots of research from different countries who have either been colonized by English-speaking contexts, or maybe have, like Taiwan, has spent a lot of time and investment and money doing English language learning. English is kind of seen as kind of a double-edged sword, right? So various folks have described English as kind of a monster, right? So you can see kind of this lingua Frankensteinia killer language, because it comes at the expense of killing off other minority languages, like a T-Rex, a guilty language, because it's doing these it's not really killing people, right? But in a sense, metaphorically, it is doing some damage to other languages and local languages. And I think this is a very interesting sort of metaphor, this Hydra, right? So the Hydra, it actually is that multi-headed dragon, right? That could be evil at some times, but also could be like less evil at other times, right? So oftentimes folks describe English as this kind of Hydra and thief, right? Cultural thieving, linguistic thieving. So on the right in yellow, you might be more familiar with these terms, right? You may have encountered, oh, English is an international language, English as a lingua franca, English as a foreign language, which seem a little bit more sort of tame, less dangerous, right? But in the world, right, beyond the US context, or maybe the Western world, oftentimes English is seen as, and I like this quote at the kind of the bottom right, a well-intentioned auntie who rather overstays her welcome, meddling in family affairs, right? So this kind of busybody kind of person, this metaphor in everybody's business, so to speak, right? So we wanted to just put that out there for you to think about, right? Why is it that there is this term linguistic imperialism? It really does come from these metaphors of English, how English is seen globally. Thanks. And so kind of to sum up, folks have described from various post-colonial contexts, right, the spread of English as being this kind of pervasive, self-perpetuating thing, right? While learning English can be kind of a very powerful tool and asset, which a lot of folks have sort of taken on this belief, it can also be very destructive, right? this process of English language domination is complex, and it's also very contradictory, right? Like, even though you hate English, you can still study it and spend many, many hours studying it. At the same time, there are fightbacks against the domination of English. And you may be seeing this in your local context. Your students might be pushing back, your teachers might be pushing back, and that's okay and totally normal, right? And also kind of this idea that it's not just English, right? English is not alone in its cultural thieving. Folks have mentioned Mandarin actually is also a cultural linguistic thief as well, because it's being learned at the expense of other local languages, including Holo, Taiwanese, Hakka, indigenous languages in Taiwan. So it's just something to think about, right? We're not kind of putting the total blame on English per se, right? English itself isn't doing it, but I think there is this process, this global process that's happening, and it's not alone, right? English is not alone.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's a comment. Can we have access to these slides afterwards? Of course, we'll definitely share that. So I want to talk about this symmetric principle about different languages in the society. So languages are not equally distributed in terms of power and prestige. The fact that many of us here are proficient in English means a lot, because a lot of my fellow Taiwanese friends, they feel like they could never reach the level where they can converse with others in English comfortably. And then they oftentimes feel ashamed about their incapability of doing that. Because after all, many Taiwanese spend many, many years of learning a foreign language. And we oftentimes evaluate our English against with like native speakers, and that just create a lot of anxiety among parents and students. And oftentimes, the fact that you speak English and you are from the US means so much to the local people. You probably will see that they treat you very differently, sometimes might to the degree that you don't feel that comfortable. So grappling with your prestige, I think, or your, I would say, privilege, grappling with your privilege would be something that you will need to really face. I would say probably on a daily basis while you are in Taiwan. Okay, so I just kind of hope that while you come in with all the knowledge about English, about USA culture, you can't wait to share. Please be mindful about the possible impact that you may create. And then again, the capitals, the cultural linguistic capitals that you carry with you. So fewer than 4% of the world's languages have any kind of official status in the countries where they are spoken. I want to pause here and then invite you to think about, so what does that mean? So in the case of Taiwan, the official language is Mandarin. So for other local languages such as Holo, Hakka, and other indigenous languages, they do not have the official language status. Okay, so when a language have reached the official status, that means the schools, right, gonna teach that. It could become the medium of instruction in the school. It has a lot of resources to promote that language. So think about that. If you have an indigenous child, okay, from a tribe, at home, she or he might not speak Mandarin, okay, to the elderly or to the parents, or their Mandarin might be accented. And now your role there is to teach one additional language, right? So think about how this child may have to kind of deal with. There are several things that this child may have to think about. It's about resources. whether or not he or she has additional time or money to learn English. And it's also about like how his own heritage is being viewed in the society. We know very well from the USA experiences, a lot of times heritage speakers are not being valued enough in the USA school system. And you might also see that in Taiwan, where Mandarin and English are being prioritized over other local languages. And just so you know, the Taiwanese government want to make Taiwan as a bilingual country by 2030. And when the government means bilingual country, it means Mandarin and English. Okay, so you can see that the government has its own, say, agenda or agenda to promote like a Taiwan as a bilingual country, but how that would impact local people in terms of how they learn other languages and how they see English. So I want you again to keep that in mind as you spend your time in Taiwan. You will see that Taiwan, after all, is a very multilingual country, but then in school context, only very few languages are being valued or prioritized. Okay, so next one, 100 largest languages account for 90% of all speakers. I don't know how you feel about these numbers here, but then one thing that we have been worried about in Taiwan in particular is linguistic diversity. Taiwan used to be a super multilingual country, but nowadays it's not. A lot of languages are dying. I would say my next generation, only very few kids would be fully proficient in Holo or Hakka or other languages. So these languages are dying at a faster rate, a much, much faster rate than you can think of. Okay, so again, being someone as a, say, coming from the US, how are you going to teach English while attending to these local issues? I think it's something very kind of challenging. I sometimes don't even have an answer myself, but just be very aware of the local context. I think it's gonna help your teaching and building up your relationship with the students and teacher. And the things that I just shared really plays out not just in terms of teaching, but also in terms of teacher recruitment. Yeah, if you look at some ESL type of job advertisement, oftentimes you will come across these terms. The local English cram schools or private schools, they are looking for Western looking applicants, and that means they are looking for someone who look white. Okay, they don't want ABC, which means American born Chinese. Okay, because ABC looks basically just like a local people, so they don't want that. They want native foreigners. Okay, and they sometimes kind of blame parents for that. They will say, oh, we are just doing what the market wants. Yeah. But the thing is, at the end, I want you to think about who actually benefits from this kind of view, this kind of world view that place someone's nativeness or country of origin on the top while you're disregarding other important qualifications of teachers. I remember my friend told me that one of the foreign English teacher in her daughter's cram school is actually an Egyptian who's looks white and who is from like a foreign country. And even though this Egyptian has no degree and no teaching experience, her pay is still much, much higher than local Taiwanese teachers. And I would say this is totally not kind of culturally appropriate, or even in terms of a professional perspective, it's totally not okay. But you will see that still happening here in Taiwan.
Yeah, I think the last time we went through the slide, I think, Ming, if you go back to the requirements, right? You and I went through these requirements, and we both have like advanced degrees in teaching English, and we have degrees in education. We would not be hired. We're not Western looking. I'm in ABC, I guess, and I'm not a native foreigner, I guess, and I'm not a real foreigner. So I guess I would be completely written off, or you and I would be completely written off from a job teaching English in Taiwan. Unfortunately, we will not be hired by a grant school, right? And we laugh, but it's not funny. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not okay, right? And so we give you this in the next slide, an example of an international school, Kangqiao International School. I think they have a branch in like Taipei. In 2018, they had a pretty big fallout because there was, a call for substitute teachers, and then they were saying, okay, here are the qualifications, and it's like personal note, and you see it kind of bracketed there. The school has informed me that it will not accept applications from people who are not from predominantly English-speaking countries or who are Black or dark-skinned. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Right. So I think we show this example as sort of this way of sort of thinking, okay, well, this individual is knowing that this is not okay. So they're trying to do this kind of fight back. But at the same time, these top-down processes, like these kind of structural baked in policies from the school, from kind of larger institutional contexts, are prohibiting kind of any change from happening, right? And so the next slide, I think, is Kangqiao's official response, which is this kind of boilerplate, we do not discriminate based on whatever. And I think, these kinds of responses are not enough, right? And so it speaks to really the ways in which we really have to start chipping away at dismantling these larger structures of discrimination based on all these things that they say that they're not basing discrimination on, right? So you may find that you experience, or you're observing this happening at your local context. And if you do see this, call it out, or you can come talk to us, talk to Fulbright about it, and we can sort of work our way to dismantle. Obviously, we can't overthrow it altogether in one sitting, but there are ways that we can work towards making this better, right, for folks who are being discriminated against at the workplace, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about the intersectionality of nativeness. So it would be too simple or too just kind of easy to say that, being a native English speaker means a full range of privilege. No, because in reality, identity don't work in vacuum. Identity works like an intersectionally with other social variables such as race and gender or nationality, all that, right? So, for example, in terms of nationality, you can imagine that in Taiwan, the hiring practices usually want people from the US, Canada, UK, okay, and Australia and New Zealand. I would say the second tier,
and then South Africa, maybe, and Ireland.
Right, will be like a third tier. So you see that hierarchies, and you kind of feel like, wow, just based on where you were born or where you got your citizenship will really kind of place you differently on this hierarchy. And I wouldn't say that, you guys are lucky because you are from the US and you're always kind of at the top. No, because things don't work that easy. It also matter as to you how you look, right? So earlier, Dr. Leung showed that people with darker skin sometimes are not as welcomed in Taiwan context. And I have another example that I want to share with you. Some of the most racist comments that I ever heard are actually from my Taiwanese friends when they talk about the foreign workers from Southeast Asia, which I believe you're gonna encounter many of them. The Taiwanese folks, basically a lot of them, just don't see them as equal. They see people from Southeast Asia with darker skin as someone like below them. Okay, and unfortunately, sometimes that kind of ideology, I guess, would transfer to the younger generation, because in their family they might have a foreign worker who are from Southeast Asia, who take care of their grandparents, their sick grandparents, and they treat them like as a maid or as someone who needs to do a lot of housework for them. So again, it's not just about nationality or speaking English as a first language, because a lot of Filipino workers, they speak English as their first language, or they are multilingual and the English is one of their language ability, but they are not valued as much because they are from Philippines and because they have, say, darker skin. And next is gender. And oh gosh, we have so many stuff that we can talk about that. Yeah, being, say, a white woman, okay, in workplace versus an Asian American woman in workplace means quite different, right? Last year, I went back to Taiwan. I actually took my colleague from the TESOL program with me because we need to do some site visit to make sure that next year we can do a study abroad program in Taiwan. And to tell you what, I feel like I was treated very differently. Even though I'm from Taiwan, these are the local, say, colleagues of mine. The moment when they saw my white colleague, who's a female, they were all drawn to them. They feel like she is the authority to go to. And whenever they're questioned, they look at my white colleague and then hope that she can give them some guidance. Whereas I would say I should be the local expert. And then I was trained in TESOL. I know Taiwan so well. I could give like a very relevant answers or advice, but I was not as valued. So all these like small things would just kind of pile up and eventually make you think deeply about who you are and how you kind of present yourself, in what way you want to present yourself. Because over time, as I get more secure in my job, I oftentimes speak out. Yeah, I chose my battles. Sometimes I chose not to speak out because I don't want to spend too much effort and time on people that I don't care. But sometimes I do speak out, and it might not be just for myself, but for others who have similar experience of mine. Okay, so I want to read this quote out. Treating teachers in one category, either universally privileged or marginalized, really fails to capture teachers experiencing fluid privilege and marginalization. I think that really gonna capture a lot of our experience. You will experience that fluidity of identity. Sometimes you kind of enjoy your privilege, but sometimes in Taiwan, you feel like you are being marginalized because of who you are. And all these are very, very common and actually have been discussed in the literature. Other social variable includes like abilities, mixed race identity, gender fluidity, class, or language proficiency. Right. So again, it's not easy. I guess that's what I want to say. But then at the same time, you choose your battle. Maybe you chose not to speak up the first 2 months because you are still trying to adjust yourself. But maybe toward the end of the first year, you feel like, you know what, I want to speak up, then you will have Jen and Mai for support. Right.
Yeah, thank you, Ming, for bringing this up. And I see somebody has also thank you for mentioning this, right? And I think it's really important to note that thinking through what it means to be privileged, what it means to be marginalized, and that folks are never 100% privileged or marginalized all the time, right? That kind of dynamic that you can be both privileged and marginalized at the very same time, and you're like, whoa, what's happening, right? Thinking that through, right? Critically processing that and talking through with others. If you're saying like, what is happening? That's okay. And that's perfectly normal, right? And very important, not just as, developing as teachers and working to build bridges and these connections with your students, but also just understanding who you are. Who am I in relationship to others around me in Taiwan, right? Which might be different than who am I in relationship to others around me in the US, right? So that dynamic constantly shifts over time and across time and space. And so in Taiwan, we really encourage you to kind of think about that and think through that. And we're here for you if you want to ever talk. I'm looking at the time, we are at 50. So do you, Ming, want to maybe take a 10-minute break and then we'll pick up at 10 o'clock? Is that cool?
Yes.
Great. Thank you folks for being with us. Please come back in 10 minutes and we'll pick up where we started or stopped, pick up where we stopped. Hi, Ming. It's always a little awkward when you show up early and you're like, do we say something? Should we just sit here? Oh, and thank you for those of you who have dropped stuff in the chat. Thank you.
Oh, didn't even see that.
I'm glad you're
Oh, wow,
doing
I
and
didn't see
learning.
that.
Do you have your students be like chat monitors? Ming, when you teach graduate students, so maybe not. My undergrads, I'm like, can you please be my chat monitor? They're like, okay. It usually
Yeah.
works only for like a week.
Got some really nice feedback. Oh, I'm so happy.
All right, I think it's
Nice.
about 10 o'clock.
Sure. So
We're all back. I don't know. I think we're all back. We're gonna assume we're all back.
So I'm gonna move on directly onto the next slide. It's okay
Anyway.
with you guys. So let's shift the focus from ourselves to our students and look at why they need to learn English. Okay, so are they bilingual or multilingual by choice or necessity? Okay, so let's talk about the USA case first, because that's where we feel most comfortable knowledge about, right? So I really like Vaday's way of categorizing bilinguals into elective bilingual or circumstantial bilinguals. So elective bilingual refers to those who chose to learn or use an additional language. So this additional language is being seen as additional assets to whatever you're already doing. And this should oftentimes refers to the middle class monolingual English speakers who decide, who has the money, who has the resources to learn, say, Spanish or Mandarin or other languages. But then, that's reminded us that a lot of heritage speakers, Spanish speakers in particular, they are circumstantial bilinguals. They are someone who must learn English or use more than one language in order to function in their society. So many of them, for example, they have to act as translator for their parents. And even they are very young, they might need to translate the legal document or medical documents for their parents. And think about their bilingual experience is very, very different from a middle class kid who learned Spanish, right? So I want you to think about how this like a categorization might help you to understand your students in Taiwan. Are they are they coming from a middle class family with lots of resources to learn English? Or are they someone who sort of forced to learn English in order to not necessarily function in Taiwan, but more like in order to move up in the schools in Taiwan? Because after all, English is a subject that needs to be tested, that needs to be graded, all right? And it's a very important subject. It's oftentimes being regarded as important as Mandarin, math. Okay, so the third one usually is English. So a lot of times the English test is high-stack test in Taiwanese context. So ask ourselves, okay, are our students in Taiwan elective or circumstantial bilinguals, or can they be both? Because I feel like for myself, at one point of my life, I'm like an elective, but at another point of my life, I regarded myself as a circumstantial. So think about that and see how you can sort of build a better rapport once you understand how your student view their English learning experience. Next, I want to talk about context. So context matters it matters a lot. Racialization can and does happen on both sides. Here I refer to the US and in Taiwan, or say Asia, to be more broadly defined. So I have 3 quotes here I want to share. The first one is by an Asian American who teach in Taiwan. She reflects upon her experience in Taiwan, and this is what she said. It's very ironic. I have my English ability questioned in the States, and when I come here, I have my English ability questioned here by teachers who never heard me speak. So she talked to the principal that she's concerned, but she never talked to me or heard me speak English. So in the US, being an Asian American in the US, a lot of times her English ability was questioned. And then here in Taiwan, her English ability was questioned again, because here people in Taiwan, a lot of times their knowledge of the US is a little bit narrowed, because after all, many of them have not been to the US, and their knowledge of the US comes from, I would say, Hollywood movies a lot. And oftentimes, if we take a very critical stance to look at a lot of the popular TV series or the Hollywood movies, they still predominantly have the men or leading actor, actress as like a white. So a lot of times Taiwanese people have this very narrow-minded view of American have to be white. Okay, and I have a personal experience to attest to this. So this past summer, I did a presentation to a group of elementary students in Taiwan. So I have a slide with several famous people's photo on it, and I want the kids to choose which of them are American. So I have photo of Michelle Obama, I have Genevieve, Leung, and I have Trump as well. So I have a wide range of photos, tries to be very like inclusive, and not surprisingly, kids only choose like people who look white. And then when I told them that Michelle Obama as well as Jeremy Leung are also American, they were like a shock. They didn't know that these can be American too. So just so you know that for those of you who look like local people or who look not white, you might be questioned about your legitimacy, in the local context. So be prepared for that and think of way how you want to engage your student in this conversation. I think you guys have this like a perfect job to really teach about diversity of the US to your student. And I think the local kids will, as well as the local teachers, by the way, will benefit so greatly from your own experience. The next is Cho, 2012. He in his or her, I don't know, study, they talk about Korean American male teachers in South Korea. The male teachers talk about teaching in Korea, give them liberating feelings, like they have been able to escape the USA racial hierarchy, and then they sort of like enjoy their new identity in South Korea. But then, ironically, it's not like these Korean American male teachers continue to have that sense of kind of fulfillment. No, because at one point, they got questioned about their, say, English ability. So you can see that marginalization or privilege is like on a very fluid scale. At one point, the Korean American male feel like, oh, finally, like the women here don't see me, the women here see me as a viable dating kind of possibility. But all of a sudden, another occasion, they will feel like, oh, but you are not like a real American because you still look Asian, you still look like us. So a lot of times these Korean American male teacher feels that they got stuck in between. They feel like they don't see USA as their home, and then they don't see Korea as their final home as well. So you can imagine it's a very draining experience, right? And lastly, Charlie's study talks about Black English teachers in South Korea as well. A lot of times these teachers, they need to fight back. They need to combat student or teacher, other local teachers, racial stereotype of Black American, not just as un-American, but also all sort of very, I would say, racist comment that would come up from the local teacher. Again, you could blame them, but at the same time, you feel like you cannot blame these local students because most of their knowledge about Blacks in the US are from the movie. And again, if we look at the movies critically enough, we sort of know how Black males in particular are being portrayed in the movie.
Yeah, thank you, Ming, for sharing. And I just wanted to also iterate just that there is a bountiful sort of a field of research on teaching pedagogy and being teaching in Asia. And so we'll share a list of readings for you as well. And just kind of thinking about the ways in which, you know, the racialization happening on both sides is not necessarily a direct import, right? Everything happening in the US is not exactly the same happening in Taiwan, right? So the ways in which those nuances play out is important, and is important to reflect upon and think through and work on, right? And so thinking about even I, as you were talking about the experiences of, you know, not really being Asian or not really being American, I think the most common comment I get in Taiwan is, "You speak English so well." I'm always like, "Thanks." I've been speaking it for over 30 years. I've been working really hard on it, right? So, I mean, you can use humor to kind of fight back, or you can, you know, but it does get really exhausting. I'm like, what more do I need to like wrap an American flag around me to show that I'm really American, right? So these are issues that continually folks of color teaching English all have to contend with as well, right? And so kind of the next slide kind of looks at, you know, so now what? And what do we do? What can we do as teachers, right? And this kind of idea of needs assessment, which I think you do regularly as teachers anyway. Where are my students? What are their levels? How can I like best tailor my teaching towards my students? You can also work on that in terms of developing engagement. What does it mean for my students, and how do I work on that, right? So kind of regularizing this needs assessment has to start from the bottom up, right? So we talked a lot about top-down processes, institutionally kind of demands, policies, but we can now think about how do we work from the bottom up to make the experience of English language education as emancipatory as possible, right? But also realizing what emancipatory education means for one person might not actually be the same for somebody else, right? So we kind of work within that dynamic. I like to just kind of pose this quote by Freire, I'm able to pronounce his name, Freire and Macedo, right? That kind of the ways in which literacy or education can be emancipatory, it must be conducted in the language of the people, not necessarily in Mandarin or Holo or Hakka, but also kind of the ways in which it's digestible, understandable, relatable to the people, right? It's through this language that students can name the world and establish this kind of dialectical relationship with the dominant class in the processes of transforming social and political structures that imprison them in this culture of silence. And I think kind of unpacking that, thinking about, you know, who are we as teachers? What kind of teachers do we want to become becomes important here, right? Are we inadvertently silencing our students by imposing English, the same English that has sort of tormented them Are we being that teacher? Are we realizing that we're doing it and still doing it? Or are we realizing that this might be the case and kind of transforming and thinking through other ways to engage our students vis-a-vis English? If you have to teach an English class, how can we do it in a way that opens dialogue, that creates real change, right? It doesn't have to be monumental. It could be kind of a step-by-step process where you take on just a little bit. How do I kind of change my students' minds? How do I expand their kind of visions of who an American is? Maybe it's simply by showing up in the classroom, I am showing them a different side of America, right? And so thinking about being literate, being educated as a way to use language for this kind of social or political reconstruction, I think is like the goal. It's a gold standard, perhaps, but thinking about how we might move towards that scale in helping our students realize that as part of their education also starts from the bottom up, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I want to kind of take a moment to reflect on your job, your work as cultural ambassador, because oftentimes not just like a Fulbright expect you to teach American culture, the local teacher, the local school expect you to teach that as well. They feel like you bring a not just language per se, but a wealth of cultural knowledge that local kids can learn from you. But I want you to, again, be a little bit critical about what counts culture and what teaching culture means, because we don't want you to just teach a few isolated historical and geographical facts, holiday customs, or food preferences. Yes, you can teach them, but at the same time, think about ways you can move beyond superficial cultural representation in your teaching. Because after all, you as a living kind of cultural ambassador, you live through so many different facets of American culture. And this is a great opportunity to offer the local student a more complex, a more nuanced understanding of a USA culture. You are a perfect teacher to bring in your personalized voice and story to the students. That will be, again, a very valuable moment where you could possibly break or shatter the USA stereotype that your students might have. And sometimes, depending on the age group that you are teaching, you might want to talk more about, say, tensions or struggles among different groups in the US, because I can almost 100% sure that most of them don't got to learn about the USA culture. And for me, when I kind of learned English for so many years in Taiwan, and when I first came to the States and I start to experience some discriminations, both kind of verbally, I feel like my worldview shattered, because I never heard about that or learned about that while I am in Taiwan. I'm just kind of hoping that my American teacher at that time could sort of give me a different picture of the USA culture. And it's not like I expect these conversation can prepare me to face these moments, but I think instead of picturing a very beautiful La La Land type of image, I would appreciate, as a student in Taiwan, I personally would appreciate a more thought-provoking type of conversation. And don't underestimate your students, even though their English proficiency might not at the level you think they can be engaged in this kind of conversation. I think you should still be creative in terms of how you can integrate that. So the example that I just showed share with you about showing different photos of American, like a famous people, and have kids to choose who they think are American is an example. Yeah, you don't even need to talk too much, and the end result is definitely more than you think. I have two students who comment on the site saying that, oh, I don't know that Asian can be like a American, or I don't know, like blacks can be like a American. So these of conversation I think is critically needed, and I hope you can be in that part of conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Ming, for sharing that. And I think your example sort of jump-started something for me as I was thinking through, being from San Francisco. I think the typical conversation, oh, you're from San Francisco. And so many, many years ago, I did the JET program. So I taught English in Japan, and I was like, how do I design a lesson that illustrates where I'm from? And so it was sort of this basic, like, here's the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, it's even on my Zoom background, right? So it's like, here are some iconic places in San Francisco. Here's Silicon Valley, right? Like, we make a lot of computers there, Apple, blah, blah, blah. But now thinking about it now, many years later, right? Some of the ways, and I think there was a question also that was like, oh, how do I engage younger learners about things like this? Is really also thinking about, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and then the various ways and waves of gentrification that has also taken place, right? And gentrification, even though it is a big, big concept, it's not just unique to the United States, right? So there are, even in Taiwan, things like this are happening in terms of, people being displaced to build bigger apartment buildings or things like that, right? So kind of not just saying, okay, gentrification, here's the vocabulary word, learn about it, but using kind of step-by-step building blocks or scaffolds to think about, okay, why, for example, San Francisco, why would people want to live in San Francisco? Who has lived in San Francisco before, tech companies showed up? And then thinking about displacement, like people moving, why do people have to move, right? So you don't use necessarily those big vocabulary words, but building it out or taking it into smaller chunks to explain situations. How would you feel if you had to move or leave? And you can link that to larger kind of conversations about displacement, global displacement, refugees, war, right? So you can have students maybe brainstorm about why people might have to move as a jumping point, right? Did your family move from, Taipei from Miaoli, or why, right? So, these conversations about movement could be digestible for younger learners, right? So I often think about, the ways I taught as a 20-something-year-old in Japan, and it really sucked. My students, I probably did a major disservice to my students. But now thinking back, I could maybe how might I have rehashed some of these lessons, right? Thanks.
Yeah, we got some really nice feedback from the comments. While I switch it to the next slide, you can take a look.
Yeah. And I think we have further reading for you all. And I think this is coming from us as like professor mode here, do some readings. But it's not just that. I think there really is a bountiful body of literature that looks at teaching in Asia, teaching English, pre-service teachers, teaching and growing as English teachers in Asia, race and decolonization of practice, right? So it's not necessarily that you have to read all of them in one sitting. It's that if perhaps you encounter issues, you're like, oh, why am I struggling with this? Or like, what's happening here? Why am I being viewed this way as a teacher, right? As an American, why don't people believe I'm American, right? There is research and literature out there. We can direct you to them if you'd like. We will also share with you a folder so that you can even have access to it. If you ever want to talk, we're here for you as well. Right.
Yes. All right. So, okay, if I may, I kind of want to add something because we haven't talked about being mixed race or being adoptees and working in Asia. So just to prep for those of you who are mixed race, be prepared to encounter comments like local people don't believe you are American. Yeah, because we have documented that several times among the mixed race teachers, and this again is studied in like other East Asia contexts as well. So you will have to grapple things that are very similar to Asian American teachers who need to grapple with that. And for the adoptees, we also found that the picture, the reality is even more complex because a lot of the adoptees, they don't necessarily speak or learn Mandarin. They grow up in households where they don't hear Mandarin, but then the local people always assume that they should at least understand some sort of Mandarin, right? So that is added pressure on them. And a lot of times they were even expected to be the translator for their for other, say, ETAs. And it's just simply because they look Asian or they look local people. So be prepare for these all kinds of possibility, and sometimes things just happen in that moment and you sort of don't know how to handle that, and which is okay, because the first time when you encounter that, I would say that your mind probably would just go blank. But then once you come back, okay, you do some sort of debriefing, you reach out to people you trust, you sort of seek support from other peers. For those of you who don't need to experience these, please be the support that your colleague need. Because again, I would say a lot of times the research has told us that all these type of experience can be very, very daunting, exhausting. There's a lot of emotional labors that kind of come with it. So be each other's support.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some great conversations in the chat, and I also wanted to follow up with Ming's comment that being presented with these kind of like having to grapple with these conversations presents new opportunities and jumpstarts pedagogical creativity in lessons as well. And I remember you and I, Ming, had a we're looking at some quotes from folks who design lesson plans of here's my family. It's 4 people, but it's not a mother and a father and a and 2 biological children. It's 2 mothers and 2 adopted children, and then showing pictures and saying, this is my family, let me explain who my family is, right? So these different family units, right? Under having folks visualize and see that there's not just one way of being a family is important for learners to see as well. I think as you explain the breakout room, there's also a query about having a shared doc for people to put ideas in teaching. I think that would be a great idea. And maybe Kevi, I will turn it to you to see how that can be generated.
Yeah, sure. So basically we have like activity sharing, like a Google Drive that we want to collect different kinds of activities. So maybe we can add one more category for diversity teaching or multicultural teaching in that Google Drive. So people can like send their lesson plan or activity description to that Google Drive. I will share it with everyone later on.
Super, thanks. Okay, Ming, I'll turn it back to you.
So for the remaining time, we're gonna do breakout rooms. So here are a few questions that we want you to debrief in your own breakout room. Only if you feel comfortable sharing, because I know many of you haven't got to know each other. So if you don't feel like sharing, that's okay. But basically, I want to know a little bit about what would be one action item that you think you will take in pushing back against linguistic imperialism and incorporating diverse voices or experiences as you prepare yourself for teaching this school semester. And if you still have time, I would like you to talk about what doubts and concern do you still have about teaching for this school semester. Yeah, because Jen and I are here to support you. So if you got to talk about, you want to kind of raise your concern and questions, we will reconvene and we will have time to address your concerns. So Kelly, do you think you will be able to help us with the breakout room? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yes.
I see Kevi and Jody are communicating. This is great. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it's like real time. It's happening. It's happening. Thank you. So we'll give you about 10 minutes and you'll be put in breakout rooms. Please have fruitful conversations. We're excited to hear what you all debrief on when you return. And we're okay on time, right, Kevi?
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
perfect,
okay,
actually.
cool.
So I think we
That's
will have
exactly
enough
the
time.
that-
Phew,
yeah, I think it's the
yes.
exact time that you think. It's 10:30.
Good job, Ming. Go team. High five.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna...
And so the other folks in the room are staff.
There's,
Is that right?
I
Or
think there's still some ETAs in this room.
Oh.
Let me check.
Because we have over 30, right? 31.
Right.
maybe some folks fell asleep during our talk. We were that engaging.
Oh, I hope not.
Ming, have you ever fallen asleep during a Zoom meeting though? It's really embarrassing. I have. And then I was the last one. I was like, oh,
Oh my
whoops.
God. I actually got a private message.
Mhm.
Yeah, through the chat.
Mhm.
Yeah, one ETA just say that she really appreciate talk about the Asian American experience in Taiwan.
Mhm.
I feel like it's not really understood. So thank you for sharing about your experience.
Oh, yeah. I got one like that too.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great presentation so far. That's good.
My students are never this active. Every time I see this, I'm like, oh wow, there are places where
I
people are like nice on the
know.
chat.
That is something.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I think there are some really great comments here in the chat.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm reading that too.
Mhm. Yeah, immersive Jewish community. I think, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the Jewish, yeah. I think that's definitely still very relevant.
Yeah.
Amazing. Excellent. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna be right back.
Cool. Kevi, are you and Jody like across from each other in real life?
Yeah.
Because I'm watching the two of your screens. You're not next to each other, but you're like,
Right.
Jody is to the right and then Kevi, you're to the left. So then when she turns to the, you're like talking.
Yeah.
Wait.
We were chatting.
That's hilarious. Okay. Obviously it's the little things that are intriguing to me.
I think a lot of ETAs got like a very good feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So,
nice too that they're sort of in the hotel room, right? Like they have nothing else to do but to learn.
yeah, but they can think about these issues. I mean, even
Yeah.
like all of them can think about these
Mhm.
issues. Yeah.
Mhm.
And everyone could be the minority in a certain kind of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know
think
what
so.
happened. My screen just kind of, or my Zoom just kind of stopped working. Can
Oh.
you move me back into the Huadian group?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Zoom me back.
You back, Scott.
It's like, yeah, I know. Star Trek. That's Star Trek, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay. Uh,
Yeah, I'm back.
oh, hi. Welcome back.
Yeah. So after their discussion, is there any, how many slides do you guys
That's
have?
it. And then we
That's
have the
it.
debrief, and then we're going, this time I will remember to drop our emails in the chat. And then that's it.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, if you forget, I will still send them your email later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will send you a link to the folder, and in the folder will also be the
All the articles, right?
and the PDF of today's slide. Is that cool?
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of them will be interested reading them,
That's good.
right?
I think so. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious what like a kind of issues they will propose
Yeah,
on. Yeah.
that's cool. So they just have like one working Google Doc, is that, or a Google folder, and they like drop things
it's
in?
like, bro, they have a Google folder that created by an ETA, like 3 ETAs before, and they try to collect activities. So I think I can create one more category for that, and we can also submit their like a related activity or lesson plan to that Google Doc, Google Drive, and then other ETA can also have access to that one.
Okay, cool.
Because actually, if you ETA submit lesson plan to that project,
Well, are you surprised?
I'm not surprised at all. But I mean, like, well, you know,
Well, I mean, I think it's just like doing extra work, right? It's like feeling like it's doing it. It's not really extra work, but it's like,
right. But it's not that hard. I mean, like, you just transform what you have in your class and to that one.
But I also think it opens up for people to critique you, right? So I think there's sort of this like, what is it, also, right? Like you're like, oh, I don't want to get judged. Like I this was a great activity, but maybe just for my school, right? Like I think, yeah.
True.
I mean, even now in at USF, when they're like, share your best teaching things, I'm like, nope, I refuse. And it's not because I think I'm a bad teacher. I just think I'm like, somebody's gonna like comment on it, and they're gonna come to my office and want to talk to me about it. I'm like, no.
Or do you think we should make it anonymous?
No, I mean, I think it's good to share. I think there are some people who, like me, who don't like to share. That's a horrible thing to say. I mean, I love sharing.
I may not share anything. I mean, like if I were you, I may not share anything.
I think they're also, I mean, at USF, we have these sort of, because people don't share, they're like, oh, we'll offer you like $200 if you like to publish this, right? So then they're like, oh, money, there's money involved. And then people are like, okay, yeah, sure. Pay me. Yeah, it's money talks, right?
Even like in my university, when they tell teachers to share, and then no one wants to share, and they invite one teacher that who is willing to share to talk about her teachings in class, and then people are like, well,
yeah, exactly. Right.
Why you did a little activity, or why you play games in like a university classroom, something like that.
Yeah. See, people can be catty like that. That's why we don't.
That's true. That's why I won't share either.
Yeah.
Life is not easy. Teaching is not easy.
No, it's not. But I think it just needs to be done in like a safe space, right? Like if it were to just 5 other people, yeah, sure, totally okay. But if it's like 200 other people, I think I need to think about it first, you know? So maybe start small. I mean, I think if we have working groups too, and so I'm totally a different person in my small group.
Yeah, that's also one thing because we will have 200 something.
Yeah.
Like people, ETA and ETFs now.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure whether it's safe enough, even though it's like a closed Google Drive. So
yeah. So maybe, I mean, if you start smaller, it could be more. I mean, obviously the more vocal people will always participate more, right? But you might get the shyer people. Ming, we're just talking about sharing resources. And I was telling Kevi that as I'm not usually a sharer, especially when it comes to like large group settings. But if it were a smaller setting, like sharing my lesson plan, I'm like, I'm not sharing that. People are going to judge me.
Right.
Yeah. But if it's for somebody I trust or a smaller group of my friends, I'm like, yeah, sure. Oh my gosh.
Or like instead of sharing the kind of well-designed lesson plan, just sharing bullet points.
Yeah.
Probably people would be more likely to share.
Yeah. I've done with students, it's like, show me your crappiest lesson plans and we'll work on it.
Right.
Yeah. How are we doing on time? It's been about 10 minutes. Are we going to give them like,
coming back.
Okay, 1 minute?
Right.
1 more minute.
Do we set a time?
So what time should we close with everything? It's 11.
Like 11. Wait, we have up to 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean,
coming back
okay.
within 1 minute.
Okay, cool. And Ming, do you want to moderate this first and I'll jump in? You want to be the main?
Sure.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what they're gonna say.
Yeah. Oh, do we need to do a screen share or are we, does it matter? Or I guess we could show them the prompt first and then we
can... let's keep it there.
Okay. All right, welcome back. Maybe there have been 15 or so, 15 of you who have come back. Okay, slowly participant numbers are growing. I love doing like play-by-play. I don't know why. It just feels so satisfying. I'm like a sportscaster. Okay. Oh, 99 people. All right. Okay. 103.
Wow.
I'm sure people are like, I can read too. You don't need to narrate everything. Yeah. All right. This looks like it's about a rate, right? 100 and we had like 108.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone. Yeah, I hope that you guys have a nice chat, right? So whoever, because this is a really large group, so I understand that not each of you will get to talk, but whoever feel comfortable sharing is maybe one action plan that you want to do for this coming semester, or it could be doubts, concern, questions that you have about, because I understand that going into the field and teaching a group of students that you've never met before and who has very different educational experiences from you could be very scary, right? So we are here for you. So whoever feel like sharing, please, the floor is yours. And Jen and I would keep commenting on whatever you share, and hopefully it could be the resources for you.
Do you want us to speak like this? Like with a microphone?
Yes, this is wonderful. Yes, this is great.
So something I was talking to my group about was to make it short is trying not to water myself down. So trying not to focus on one vision of what an American is. That could be in like how I speak to my students or how I teach to my students. So just being authentically myself. So I was talking to them about how, at least for me, when I was in an academic setting, and like other Black Americans might be able to relate to this, but code switching, so trying to talk properly or talk white or just communicate in a way that you think is appropriate So I'm thinking to combat like linguistic imperialism, or to make sure diverse voices and experiences are heard, it's best for me to speak English in a way that it comes naturally to me and not try to sound white, which isn't a thing, or speak properly, or so.
This is great because in reality, almost all of us do code switch all the time. Nobody speak with quote unquote standard academic English all the time. If you do that, I don't think you're gonna have any friends. All of us have that capacity to do code switching, and we sort of want to convey that as a reality to our student as well. Because oftentimes, again, for the kids here in Taiwan, parents want them to get exposed to quote unquote British, quote unquote American standard English. But in reality, how many speakers speak like that all the time? Probably most of the speakers in the world communicate English as like a second language. Right. So what is a norm and what is not a norm? I think it's something that you as a teacher can present to your students.
Yeah, and I also like that you're using yourself as, the example. Like, here's my reality. Here's what it's like for me to speak English, and here's how I do it. And then, because oftentimes you'll be used to juxtapose against the textbook, right? Like, here's the textbook English. And you're like, well, here's another way of looking at it. Here's another way of being exposed to various varieties and forms of English, that it's not always the textbook or the audio that they play to accompany the textbook, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think on that note, for what Janaya said, we also mentioned like different cultural points, because, even within the Fulbright community, like we've all been told, you can teach your kids interesting things, like what you did growing up, like Christmas. And like, I'm Jewish and never celebrated Christmas. And it's like, even among ourselves, we have to check ourselves and realize that like, that's seen as such an American thing. Even if we say there's separation of church and state, like people might not be religious or have all different kinds of religions. And another thing that was asked was, like we're using really big words like imperialism and globalism, and like, how do you convey that stuff in a classroom to younger children? And, kind of just talking about how the point is like, you don't use those words, like those words are vocabulary words, right? So I think we used your example of the game with showing the images of different people and allowing the kids and having enough trust in them that their minds will connect the dots and make sense of it.
I think because my kids grew up in New York area, and then we have quite many Jewish friends, right? So when the kids in Taiwan ask about my kids' experience here, and when my kids talk about Hanukkah and all that Jewish holidays, none of the Taiwanese friends, none of the Taiwanese kids can relate to that because they have never heard about these holidays. And so when they know that my kids' school are off because of these Jewish holiday, they were like all shocked. Oh, is this a national holiday, or what's going on here? So I think this is what really links to the earlier comments about don't water yourself down, right? So present a true self, yourself to the student would just do quite enough, I would say. Yeah, I think it's okay for the kids to know that not every single American celebrate Christmas or Thanksgiving. I remember last year one ETA mentioned that in their family, they did not celebrate Thanksgiving, but then the local English textbook sort of expect her to talk about growing up the Thanksgiving experience. And then she says she couldn't relate it to that. And I think that is okay, totally fine. And just tell honestly with kids that we Americans do different, we have different cultural practices, and this is what makes America, right? And then in terms of what you say about these big words, I understand that these are all very big concepts, right? And I would say if I may kind of give one piece of advice, I would say like start sharing something very small and something very, very tangible from could be from the movie, from the clips. So instead of continue to show the very monolithic or very stereotypical image of the USA culture, start with something that do not usually get talked about. It could be just 1-2 minutes clip of something that portray a different experience of the USA family, for example. I think no matter what you show your kids, that will be helpful to just open up their view of what USA might look like. Yeah.
Great, thanks. I see some folks are maybe being evacuated. Check in Taipei Hotel. I hope you all are okay. Like, let's just pause real quick to make sure you all are safe. And those of you who are in check-in Taipei, are you all okay? Valerie?
Hi, I think we're currently having evacuation, so I'm just gonna leave. I'm not really sure what happened.
Oh, sure.
Okay, yes, please be safe. Wear your masks and please be safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, we understand. Yeah.
Off.
Okay, and the alarm went off.
Oh, I hope everything's okay.
Kevi, will somebody be checking in on the folks there to make sure they're okay?
Yeah, I'm checking with people.
Okay, cool.
Okay, good.
Okay. Are there other, I know folks, if you have to leave, please do, but are other folks still thinking through some comments, activities, questions?
In my group, a lot of us, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's fine.
I was just going to say in my group, a lot of us are going to be working with really young kids, like kindergartners, second graders. And so we talked about like ways to work with those kids, like people who are maybe biracial, bringing that into their introduction of themselves, like on day one, or also just like making sure when we use photos and slides and stuff that it's not like all just white people, and trying to like bring in different cultures and like names and things into examples that we're using and rhymes that we're using so that our content isn't just totally whitewashed. So just trying to throw that out there for like the younger kids. If anyone's working with those were some of our ideas.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah, I was gonna say like the exact same thing. We were wondering how to like approach our elementary school kids. And so like personally, like I think it's a difference between like class. If you grew up like upper middle class, most likely you went to school with mostly like white and Asian American counterparts in the US. And so like when I feel like it's a big thing with Asian Americans who are like they grow up going to those schools and they're like, oh, I wish I looked white. I didn't like these features of mine. I personally had like the opposite experience where like I went to school with like a lot of people of color. And so I didn't feel the same way as them. And so that made me realize like children are like kind of smarter and like we really take in a lot of stuff from like our surrounding environments. So like me being surrounded by like diversity and like my peers like never made me kind of like question my own like racial identity the same way like others might have. So just like incorporating like media, films, and even having like crayons that like, show like a darker range of skin tone is a lot more like effective, I think, than we think it to be, because like children take in so much things like passively from their environment. So that's basically what we also said too.
Yeah, that's great, right? I like the example of, the crayons, right? It's those little things like for representation when it comes to representation, right? And maybe it's also doing a, PowerPoint slideshow. Okay, let's look at the final run of what we're including in the PowerPoint. Are they all the same types of people represented or not, right? So I think it's a good sort of a check to examine the materials we're presenting to students. Definitely matters. Yeah, thanks for sharing, both of you.
I think there are two really good ideas that came up in my group. And so we were all ETAs teaching in Taitung. One that Jamie brought up, I think is really applicable to everyone, which is that, for example, apparently a former ETA would put an anonymous box out for colleagues to write any questions that they had about Americans, and it was anonymous, so they could ask whatever. And so I think, and then that ETA would address it at lunch about their own perspectives. For example, like one question that they got once was like, are Black people really that violent? And so like having the opportunity to actually have this dialogue and like address stereotypes that are untrue and are harmful, but like to do so in a way that I guess like just opens up dialogue with colleagues as well and presents a different perspective. And then another thing, we were really thinking about like, how do we teach to our Indigenous students, especially like you were mentioning how if Chinese and English are prioritized, then it is like physically true that they don't have that time to, or it's just like you have to juggle those resources like you were saying. And so I think we were struggling with like what can we do as English teachers, because we still have to teach our content. But I think another thing is that like when you're a young person who's like learning from the world, like what should be important, and then you're learning from home what might be important, I think like sometimes you have to learn to deprioritize yourself, or you learn that like you have to let go of some things. And so as like an English teacher, like giving them the vocabulary to be able to express themselves. Like you're saying, you know, not all families are just like a mother and father. And so like, why can't we introduce the word biological to a second grader also? Or like, why can't we introduce like the word like Indigenous, or like whatever else might be helpful for them to express themselves in English, and to recognize that every aspect of themselves is important too. And to also just like encourage in the little ways to let them know that like learning about your own culture and your own language is like just as important as the time you spend in our classrooms.
Wow, I was so impressed that you guys got to talk like these very complex issues. And yes, I think if you can design your curriculum in a way that validate these Indigenous students' identity, then that's really the way to go. Because even by just showing your interest in learning about their family, their practice, like daily practices, I think that matters. Because a lot of times not like the Han people, okay, the majority of the Taiwanese are Han people. Han people don't necessarily show much interest in learning about the Indigenous culture. So if you
like the superficial cultural stuff, like here, eat our food, period, right?
Exactly. So if someone like you shows some very genuine interest in learning about their life, in learning about, how they interact with their elderly, for example, I think that means a million to the students, because they don't necessarily get the same attention from their Han teacher, but then they know that you as a foreigner want to know more about that. So try to design the curriculum in a ways that can bring out their voices, can bring out their stories. And I think in this case, English learning would become very meaningful. And who knows whether or not they want to spend extra time studying English. They might want to do that just out of their own effort.
Yeah, and I think piggybacking off Ming's point, right? The idea of like decentering Mandarin, right? There's nothing that says you have to like focus on Mandarin all the time, even though that is an official language. And so using English as the vehicle to talk about indigeneity, right, is totally something you could do and build into your assignments. Whether it be like project-based learning, you can build up mini assignments where they're explaining, here's my family, these are the things I do with my family and my friends and my elders and my community, using English, right, as a way to explain their lives and their everyday communities to you. Is one way to kind of, like you mentioned, this homeschool disconnect is very real, and it's not just in Taiwan, right? In the US, this also is happening. But to bridge those homeschool disconnects, right? Like having English as the vehicle, it's one way of, spinning English. Yes, it is you know, kind of an insidious sort of a monster, but at the same time, you can harness it to your advantage to do things as an ETA in ways that, like Ming said, as Han teachers perhaps might not have that same sort of cachet for. So kind of use that and harness that. I think the ideas that you brought in are really great. And so thank you for mentioning that. We have about 1 minute. Maybe one more, if you're feeling it.
We just talked a little bit about how even if you did grow up doing very like traditionally American things or in a predominantly white community, it's important to still bring in stories that aren't necessarily your own, but reflect a greater diversity of American experiences, like through media.
Yeah, fantastic. Exactly. And even thinking like, you know, there's no such thing as a white monolithic group either, right? So thinking about the ways that, yeah, is it showing different clips? Is it represent you as, you don't have to always, you know, like, yeah, showing this representation, this larger picture is very important, and using that as an opener. You don't have to know everything about America all the time, right? But you can use this as springboards to discuss and talk through what's happening in the US, right, through English. Yeah. Thanks.
Great.
Okay, so I want to be mindful of time. I do have our emails here, so I'm going to drop this in the chat as well. Please contact us at any time. We're here. Ming is in the US, I'm in Taiwan, but you know, we're internet connects us all. So please do reach out, send us an email. You'll get a folder with the readings in an email from, I think, Kevi shortly. It'll also include this PowerPoint that we just shared with you today. If you ever have any queries, please reach out. We are here for you. So thank you for spending these 2 hours with us today.
Thank you so
So
much.
I'm very excited for you all. Yeah. So
yeah, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah, it's gonna be a great experience. So reach out to us if you need.
And we'll just do the Miss America wave.
Thank you for your participation. Thank you, Genevieve and me, to give them this wonderful speech and have everyone think about these issues they are going to encounter. So see you guys very soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hopefully you all in the hotel are also safe. So
I know.
that must be super scary.
I was just talking to Ray about how this 2 weeks very strict quarantine I don't know how they handle that, because they might not understand why the Taiwanese government needs to do that, and then they couldn't step out of the hotel room. Yeah, I think it must be hard for them.
But they do get free food.
But it's not
it's
like
not free. I know.
But you know what? This is one of my Google Classroom assignment. They have to think about what kind of major they are experiencing. I mean, compared with the state. Like if you're in Taiwan, and what kind of like majors we have done here, and they think it's very strict or very loose, or you know, they have to think about whether it's okay, because they have several talks on COVID-19, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. That's nice.
Okay. Cool. Anyway, you should.
Do you need anything from us? Or are we okay? Oh, I will send you the link.
You are awesome.
Thanks.
You guys are awesome.
You all are so kind.
Yeah, you are such a nice person as well. Good. I am glad that it was well received. They seem to be receptive and then reflective of the content, which is great. So yeah. Any other follow-up questions that you have for me?
No.
All right. So we just do the same thing for the next one.
I think it's on October 12th.
Are there also going to be like 100 something people, or is it fewer?
I think the other half, probably around 70s, or around, I think 70.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then they will be also like
In Taiwan.
the hotel,
In Taiwan.
quarantine.
I think some of them will be in quarantine, but some of them will be in their self-health management.
Okay. Cool.
For the
All
second team.
right.
Okay. And I'll send you the poll everywhere results as well, if you want to just
Okay.
dump it in there.
Yeah, we can take a look.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you also,
Okay, thank
Fulbright staff, for
you.
being on this call. It's nice to see you all.
Genevieve,
Bye. Bye. Hi, Jill. Your hair's so long. It's beautiful.
All right.
Okay. Bye. Good night, Ming.
Good
See
night.
you.
See ya.
快去睡，
不会，
快去睡。
我去睡觉了，拜拜。
对对对，
好，晚安。
拜
拜。
拜。